Landscape in the previous administration, Roozbeh, but you have Rouhani who came, and of course, based on how he has presented himself, obviously the platform and his shining star in his foreign policy, which is not just foreign policy, is the JCPOA. But the JCPOA is more than just looking at a nuclear deal. And that's one of the things that Iranians have actually, I'm sure, is a factor for them to go out and vote for either him or any other candidates, whether they think it has worked or not. How much of a factor will that play into these elections?
Well, let's face it, Kaveh, it's either Mr. Rouhani or Mr. Raisi. There's going to be no other things, because these are the two really competitive rivals that we've seen in the past month and a half, in particular after the last heated presidential elections, are going to be competing. One ideology, which is Mr. Rouhani is saying, give me more time. The JCPOA has been good for Iran and is working for Iran's economy, but it will take time. The other ideology says, well, it's not really working as well as you promised the Iranian people and the constituents. So, but regardless of who's going to be the next administration, Kaveh, the issue is not going to be on the foreign policy side. I think the issue is going to be on Iran's economy. Mr. Rouhani's promise has been a nuclear deal will revive Iran's economy, will add more jobs, will add more economic growth, will foreign investment will pour into Iran, and if politics, as we know, it's local, so we have to look at constituents, and they have, in the most part, not agree with Mr. Rouhani's at least promise, which he made about 4 years ago. And the other side, Mr. Raisi says, oh, forget about it. My job is to forget about the nuclear deal, not to abolish the nuclear deal, not to void it, but really focus on Iran's internal capacity, building domestic production. Also, that's something that we saw Mr. Rouhani also promise in the campaign promises as well. He said we need to become less dependent on the West and focus on high-quality domestic production. To what extent he's going to do that, we don't know. But on the foreign policy side, also Mr. Raisi said that he's not going to let go of JCPOA, or he's not going to violate JCPOA. So both sides are perfectly fine on the same page. It really comes down to the vision. Mr. Raisi's vision, if you remember from the last debates, was focusing on reviving small businesses in Iran. So today, it really comes down to which vision is going to win. And looking at the voter turnout today, in particular for Mr. Rouhani, let's look at the polls. Viewers should know that Rouhani and Raisi are really, in a way, neck-to-neck going up. Why? Mr. Rouhani's support was roughly about 42% if we average out the votes or the polls. And Mr. Raisi and Ghalibaf that are joining together are about 51% today. And if you add Mr. Jahangiri to Mr. Rouhani, we have roughly about the 51% on one side, which is the centrists, and 50% on the 50 to 51% on the conservatives. So it is, in a way, a very competitive election. Now it comes down to the next 30 hours, what the voters will think, and whether they think which person, which means Mr. Rouhani or Mr. Raisi, are going to be better for Iran's economy. This election, mark my words, it's not going to be about foreign policy. It's not going to be about the nuclear deal, how good it was or how bad it was. It's going to be about Iran's economy, with domestic capacity, with employment, with economic growth. And that's what the candidates, in particular Mr. Raisi and Mr. Rouhani, are promising to voters.
So if Catherine Shagdam, what Roozbeh Aliabadi says is true,